We are rolling, and I'm live here with Stephen Opper. And today we're going to have a chat. We're just talking about, really as a general theme, to today is about pushing the edge. And we're going to talk about that and how that can benefit your body and your physical practice and your mind and all of the things that make you a human being. And so I'm Benny Ferguson. If you haven't seen my face before, and like I said before, this is Stephen Opper. We'll go straight into it. Maybe why I've got Stephen here. I've been looking for people that inspire me for these conversation series, and I just came across Stephen's videos on YouTube, and as you do, and there's lots of videos out there, but the quality that he has created in his body was something that, as I've developed, I suppose, a more attuned eye, I could really recognize, and so that was kind of an inspirational kind of way that he's practicing, and I really felt that we're on the same page with, our general outlook with the body and physical practices and all of that sort of stuff. So that's why I've got Stephen here. And but anyway, I'll save me talking about him. And welcome, Stephen. And maybe if you'd just like to share a little bit about yourself, just as a general background in, I suppose, the physical world, and what you do and why you do it and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Well, it's an honor to be here and thrilled to have this conversation with you, Benny. As a general background, been doing most of my movement background initially was through martial arts for about 30 years, but I've jumped around quite a much. Mostly Chinese, and then for the last, say, 16 years, it is primarily Chinese internal arts and primarily Tai Chi. However, a lot of what I do with that is to explore the principles that I've learned through those arts and then kind of expand them into other things. Many of my teachers, as I would move around, they'd look at me and they'd say, "What is that? Where did you learn? Throw that away. That's worthless." So I'd throw everything away that I'd worked thousands of hours for, and I'd learn this new way, and then a couple years later, 5 years later, I'd move somewhere else, I'd find a new teacher, and they'd go, "What is that? Throw that away. We do it totally different here," So, that was frustrating and confusing for a long, and eventually, you just say, okay, this is all, there's a reason that people do things a certain way, and there's certain results from that way, which is not always stated up front. Anyway, just to kind of recap, I also have been practicing structural body work for about 17 years. Initially started out as Chinese body work, Tui Na, and then about 12 years ago I got really immersed in the structure and the anatomy and the mechanics. And so kind of coming from two different perspectives that very much meet, but don't always appear very similar. And had my own injuries, similar to yourself. I don't know the details of your story, but I know you came back from a serious injury, and
Yep.
and that's a big part of my motivating force for a long time was my injuries and then my accumulated injuries, and so part of what drove my practice was, for a long time it was learning how to not aggravate the injuries, but because I didn't know how to fix them, didn't know if they could be fixed, but I learned to compensate well for them and learn to move without aggravating them. And then, as time goes on, we get a little wiser. I'm 40 now, so realizing some of these things actually still can be fixed, and probably could have been fixed a lot easier way back when, but we know what we know.
Yes.
Really realizing how much subtle changes can affect your body and your tissues so differently. And some of that's about intent, and I think we have to get clear on the intent of our practice. There's an intent in martial arts, and then different systems and styles will have slightly different intent. And healing our own body or cultivating our own body, these are also different intents, and sometimes you have to tweak what you're doing a little bit you know, if you want to
Yes.
reach a certain goal. So it's very much an exploration, continual change and continual growth. Um, but yeah, like yourself, I mean, there's the physical aspect of it, but a lot of what really intrigues me is a kind of more the quality of the movement and the flooding the body with consciousness,
Mm.
and so it's one thing to perform a technique, and it's another thing to feel what's going on inside your body as you're doing that.
Yes.
Your ankle, your knees, your hips, all of that.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Awesome. There's so many little things that I'd love to dive into and extrapolate out of that. It's when you're talking about developing consciousness within the body, it reminds me of my days of exploring an Indian martial art called Kalari. And um, they have a saying that they're talking about really making the body all eyes. And I really loved
nice.
that, really loved that saying. And
It's a
um,
great saying.
yeah, and it's a very important thing. And I also liked what you were saying about your shift from, because there's a lot of people, I think you and I are similar. We work with people who are in pain, and they maybe have lost touch with their bodies, and sometimes the only way that they perceive is to like move away from the pain, to manage it, to make the best of a bad situation that they might have. And I think that's a really important shift in understanding that you can make a change, that you don't just have to, no matter how old you are, like it doesn't matter. And like, of course, 40 is very young as well in the bigger scheme of things. And yeah, so I think that's a really important thing for people that are watching, that they really understand that you can change your situation, you can get to know your body better, and then that can start to cultivate a healing process no matter where you're at. It's not lost.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think that's probably a good thing to take out of. And I also loved what you said about there's a lot of different ways in martial arts, in physical culture, and all of that sort of stuff. And it's very important to be clear on the intent, because everyone has a different intent, whether it's clear or not at the beginning, and that we make sure that we come with our clear intent, so then we can navigate the path, I suppose, in a way that is more truthful to us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, sometimes that only gets clear over time. You
Yeah.
know, I may not know initially, but yeah, I just real brief. I was working with a fellow a few weeks ago. He came to one of my classes, and he had some good background and was a good mover. And he started expressing, how he was angry at his Tai Chi teachers for teaching him never to move his knee in front of his toes, and
Yes.
it was he felt betrayed. He'd been stuck in this box. And I said, well, obviously everything he was doing so many things that required him to do to break that principle, beautiful things, wonderful things, And I said, okay, well, here, take this stance and let me pull on you. And I take this other stance and let me pull on you. There's
Yes.
a big difference in the way bones are aligned, and
Yes.
that's a parameter, and not everybody cares about that. But a
Yes.
Tai Chi player should care about, if he can get pulled off balance easily or not.
Yes.
But it's the question of knowing why we do what we do. And I know for myself, many of my teachers weren't always clear about that. It was a lot of just do as I say, and you'll figure out why later. And
Yes.
I mean, and that can certainly, it has worked for many people, but maybe it's the Western mind, maybe it's just the age and the cultures that are in. But I find a lot more value in my practice when I know why I'm doing what I'm doing,
Mm.
and then I can tailor it. Um,
Yes. Yeah. There's some really good things. And I find, uh, maybe it's because a lot of Eastern traditions, martial arts traditions, they were verbally communicated, and maybe there's been a dilution over the years. Who knows? And sometimes things are taught from an intellectual perspective rather than an embodied perspective.
yes,
And
yeah,
so then the whole knees over the toes sort of thing, I often ask the question of, regardless of the position, is it connected? And you explain that so wonderfully, in terms of applying external forces on a stance, a position, a movement, to actually see, is it connected? Is the body connected in this movement, whether it's from a martial perspective, so you don't get pushed over, or, you lose your grounding, or maybe just a health perspective of the body being able to distribute weight more evenly throughout the structure.
Yes.
So, and the two things obviously overlap. And
Yes, very much.
So it brought me up the question about, and a few people have been asking, as I mentioned, that I was going to have a chat with you about, what inspires you? Why do you practice?
Why do I practice?
Yeah.
I mean, the short answer is because it brings me joy. Honestly.
Yeah.
There's many wonderful things to do in life. I personally feel like everybody's life would be better off if they have an art. For some people that's playing guitar. For some people that's movement, or maybe more specific name to their practice, or yoga, however, And there's a certain amount of, everybody has a physical body, so some maintenance is required,
We should get that like a little label on the box that we're born into. Some maintenance may be required.
And it was one of these things, when I was younger, life gets full and life gets busy, and there's things I've had to put down, things that I loved and still love, but I don't play music nearly as much as I used to, and it's okay, I still love it, but I tried putting down the physical practice, and including the martial arts, but just in the general physical and movement practice, and I wasn't me. I didn't feel like me anymore, and so I quickly had to realize that this is an essential thing for me. Like I feel right when I'm doing my practice, and something doesn't feel right when I'm not, and so I allow myself the flexibility to change. I train every day, but what I do specifically, that'll change over time. And then there's things I come back to, kind of things that become foundational for me. But it brings me joy. It keeps me not just emotionally feeling right and mentally clearer, but also physically. Like I mentioned, I have had pain issues, and that's been a driving force. I have to. When I do my practice, I feel better and better. When I don't do my practice, I feel worse and worse.
Yeah.
And so that's a great motivator right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's led me to things where now I don't backslide as much, because I've been able to turn the corner on things. But I've had to kind of put the time into kind of beating my head against the wall until I realize there's a door right over there, and then you walk through the door and it's, that's how we fix that. Okay. But these things, they didn't always come quickly for me. Sometimes you put the time in before you realize what's been standing there the whole time.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I really love that that you explained from an internal experience with your practice, and the reason why I love that is I see a lot of people, and you probably see it too. Lots of people do fitness, and they attempt to take care of their body. And I think we all do the best that we can, but a lot of people can really be striving for some sort of external experience, whether it's, I look good, or like I feel strong, I can lift heavy things, or I can dominate my opponent, or something like that. And, at the end of the day, when you lay in bed, you got to feel that body, and it does come down to what's the experience on the inside. And I think that guiding principle of joy just alone, and it's a big part for me as well, that influences the type of practices that I do. I used to do a lot of heavy lifting and all that sort of stuff back in the day, and it took having a very challenging spinal injury to then wake up and go, maybe I need to look at things a little differently. Maybe this isn't like what life's about for me. And so I love that first and foremost you explained an internal experience, and of course it's very subjective for everyone, but so yeah, I was just going to say a good tip for people there is just to look within yourself. You know, why are you doing your practice? Why, like, what's the point of having a body? What's the point of training it towards something? Where is that going? Not just today, but maybe in the next 5, 10, 20 years, because you're going to have the body for quite a while, I imagine. What were you going to
Plan.
say? Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah,
That's so I even remember it. Yeah.
that's all right.
But like one of the things you brought up, you know, that you do like practices and heavy weightlifting and things like that, and um, you know, we do what we do, and then sometimes we have to kind of sometimes walk the path a little bit to see where it's actually taking us, and
Yes.
it's not always. Sometimes it's a component piece, and we just have the proportions wrong, you know, or
Yes.
you know, sometimes you just got to add another secret ingredient or a little spice, and then it's a whole new thing.
Yes.
Um, and so, you know, I know for myself, you know, often I'll get on a train of thought, and you know, I'll just explore, you know, a concept and kind of work with that for a while, and then sometimes, you know, then I say, okay, well, how does this relate martially? How does this relate to my self healing? How does this relate to when I work with other people for their healing? You
Mm.
know, and sometimes the answers are obvious, and sometimes not so much. But and then very often what I'll find is I'll start exploring something. I'll kind of catch a thread and follow it, and that'll bring me, you know, it's like new terrain, and it's, oh wow, you know, I've never, this feels really right, and I've never done this before or been taught. And then I'll find, you know, other people doing it, you know, um, you know, that actually it used to confuse me a little bit. I had different reactions to it, and now I love it, you know, because I feel like it's just, you know, if it's true, then it's been done, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing how, you know, how obvious something can be once you know it, you know,
Yep.
but
Staring
until
is
then,
it's like looking for your pen and realizing it was behind your ear all along. Where is it? It's right
exactly,
there. Yeah.
exactly.
So to maybe give people sort of some ideas, um, first of all, I really love because a lot of the martial arts they were born, a lot of movement practices, yoga, like all those, they were born out of observation, exploration of the natural world around them, of inquiry within the self, and beautiful things came about it. And I think if you go down that path long enough, ultimately we'll all come to maybe similar um, understandings to a degree. And so if there was like, and I know I'm a bit like you, there's always little things that I'm exploring and diving into and extrapolating and kind of just, like you said before, pushing the edge, you know, keeping you humble, understanding that you only understand what you understand, and that's always growing and evolving and changing. And there's a degree of impermanence to it all, I suppose. And
Sure.
yeah,
I think
but if
so.
you could explain maybe like a general foundation, like what does your practice look like at the moment? What sort of things are you exploring? And yeah, just
Well,
as like a general concept.
yeah, I mean, there's some things that are foundational that I try to make sure I keep coming back to in my wanderings. You know, it's part of what keeps me stable. And it is really briefly, you know, I mean, standing meditation is kind of the primary aspect. You know, it's everything kind of, you know, and it's so rich. You know, it can seem boring. There's not a lot to see, but then eventually it's, you know, it's like a your whole body's in a microscope, you know, and everything, all the sensations become so, you know, so I make sure I maintain that as a foundation. And then
Yes.
there's some other kind of primary things, but interesting, one of the things that I've been really exploring recently, and this has kind of been knocking on my door for a few years, but it's in I know it is PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, um, and this I came to it from you know, among the layers of things that have helped with some of the old injuries. This is one of these things that I'd seen some of, and a little bit had been explained to me, but I kind of it's so contrary to what I considered good movement practice.
Mm.
At least with the exploration that I was doing in my movement practice was basically, coming from a lot of Tai Chi principles, trying to use as little effort as possible, trying to let gravity, see if gravity can actually make my body move rather than my muscles making it move, or let me create a pendulum, and instead of my muscles picking my arm up, let the gravity drop and pick your arm up. That sort of thing. That's been a lot of my exploration in the last few years, and so with the PNF stuff, I'm willfully contracting muscles in a lengthened state, and I'm willfully, using kind of contracting the weak link. Instead of shifting my center of mass back under my body, I might drag my body forward with my hamstrings, for example, something. And it's making. I'm actually really. It's a piece I've been missing. I've been getting some good benefits from it, but it was. I just wouldn't even look at it because I said that's just so backwards. Why would I want to use one little muscle to pull my body? I want to, and so it's been enlightening for me to realize, everything's got a yin and yang, and it's like, so sometimes it's one of the things that was even a driving force in my practice, but I have to keep encountering my own blind spots, is to do the exact opposite. So if I do one thing, how can I do the exact opposite? And what does that do? It always does something. Whether it's something you really want or care about is a different story, but the exact opposite always does something. It's good to know what it is,
I can really relate with what you're saying. It's very similar to me, particularly when I was learning this stuff from an intellectual perspective. It was all about doing things with zero effort and maximum efficiency and softness and all of that sort of thing. And I found I dived into that as far as I could, and then I just kept hitting a wall. And in particular with, I really enjoy, in conjunction with my standing meditation practice, circle walking and different forms of that. And not necessarily under the Bagua banner, but just the patterns that can create. There's
the same way.
There's so much wonderful juice in there. And it wasn't till I realized that as soon as I then started to walk, that I was trying to be so soft that I wasn't actually grounded in my step. So I needed to learn to create this, like pulling myself along the ground. So like my feet and my hamstrings and all that are going, holy crap. And but it wasn't until I found that inefficiency that I could start to then reverse engineer it, so to speak, and then make it more efficient, and then slowly create softness around it. So it was this kind of duality. And I think that's a really important distinction for people, is to understand whatever you're doing, that there's always a complete opposite possibility that is worth considering. And I think that at the end of the day creates a more adaptive person, a more adaptive body. So because something might happen in the situation where if you're working with an opponent, or maybe you're crawling around in a natural environment, a rock falls or something, sometimes you need to learn how to go with it, or sometimes you need to learn how to brace against it, or something like that. Is there anything you'd like to add to any of that stuff? There's so many things that we could.
Yeah, there's a lot you mentioned, and I can relate to a whole lot of what you just talked about, and it's interesting to hear you say that, because it is. I mean, I still very much believe in, what we were just talking about, the maximum efficiency, as little effort as possible, as one direction to keep growing in, for sure. And it's something I want to, relaxation is more neurologically complex than contraction. And this is what I've been taught. And I believe it's true, but, that can create a dog for those of us in this little, in the soft styles, that can create a dogma that it's not even worth doing the contractions because, it's there if you need it. Well, it may not be, or may not be instantaneously, or may not be in the right proportions.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me a lot of the structure of the hips. And for me, I've had a lot of challenges around my hips in the past, and I noticed that was a really important thing for me to help my back a lot. And I realized that, I just couldn't actually relax down to the hips because everything else around it was kind of in a habitual state of contraction to some degree. And
Uh-huh.
so I need to explore both camps of being able to, like, it was interesting with my standing practice. I would start to explore, first in like a high stance of just unlocked. But then
Yes.
for a while I looked into it and I just started to let go of all the principles. There's one principle that you're probably familiar with as well, of try not to change the bone structures during your practice, in the standing work. Mm-hmm. And that's one that I was taught a long time ago. So I locked into that, and then I let go of it. The principle, I suppose, is that if the bone structure doesn't change, then it allows the structure to relax around that bone structure and naturally allow it to, for instance, like if we're like in holding the ball or something like that, if we're always moving away, then we don't get to really explore that little element that we might be disconnected with. So I threw that principle out for a second, and I just started to explore with some qua squatting type work. And just I set a timer, I think, for 20 minutes or something at the time, and just started to explore the depth of my stance.
Yep.
So I moved deeper and deeper and deeper, and then I would come out when I needed to, when my body was kind of holding a little bit. I then noticed, there's a deeper level of relaxation when I'm back up here. I then come back down, come back, deeper level of relaxation. So it took me to go into that. And of course there's a level of understanding that I needed to have to not over push it. And there's so many variables. Yeah. But I can see you nodding. So there's probably lots of similar things that you've noticed.
Almost the same story,
Yeah.
On a couple of levels. One is just after a couple of years ago I had a disc injury. The whole other story, not to get too into it, but the irony is I feel so much better in my body now than I did a couple months even before that injury. Yes. Because it forced me to look at all my blind spots. It forced me to reevaluate everything I was doing and wasn't doing, and how did I end up here? This wasn't where I thought I was going. And there were some external factors for sure, but things that I would have thought I would have been resilient enough. Anyway, but one of the key factors was due to some specific old hip injuries, I couldn't figure out how to unlock my hips for a number of years, so I just compensated for that.
That's easy.
That goes to your low back, and then everything above that, depending on what can handle it or not. And so the focus became reopening my hips. And one of the ironies is part of what locked my hips up was I spent years in deep Southern Shaolin stances.
Yes.
But it was the way I understood it, perhaps the way I was taught, I'm not sure, but definitely the way I understood was it was all this muscular effort.
Yes.
Trying to build these lines of fascial connectivity where it just held it in place.
Yes.
But try to move and it still wants to hold it in place.
Yeah.
So it I could sit in a horse stance comfortably, but then I'd stand up and everything was ratcheted down. And so I abandoned that for years and went to kind of more heaven level where it's all sinking through the bones, much more upright. But just like talking about, ideally the flesh is hanging off the bones and gravity is being efficiently transferred through the bones. A lot of value there, a lot of good things there that I never would have learned another way. However, then after realizing that I had just flooding my hips with my awareness wasn't opening them up the way I thought it should or could. And for other people that works. I know people who that works fine for. For me, it didn't. And so what I did was I ended up going back to my low stances and breaking all the principles and using them as loaded stretches, intentionally hanging my body into my soft tissue, which any of my old martial arts teachers would have looked at and gone,
"What are you doing?
How was it possible to do that so wrong?" It was like the worst kung fu stance imaginable, and I was like, okay, well that's what I'm going to go with. And it's important to know what it's good for and what it's not good for, but it was great for getting my hips to open back up. And like you said, then when you're standing up, there's less tension in there, there's less pressure on them. you
Yes.
know. And so sometimes we actually need to create some tension to bring your mind there, you know. Um,
Yes.
I mean, it'd
It's
be great if you snap your fingers and boom, your tension has flooded every cell in your body. And
yes.
sometimes we need to kind of manipulate things a little bit.
Yeah, it's the paradox of, I love talking about releasing tension from the body, and ultimately when I teach someone down the path, they get to a point and they go, I'm now feeling like my body is creating tension, but it's a different type of tension. It's an evenly distributed tension, and it's like the whole paradox. Sometimes to release it, we need to create it, and it reminds
Yeah.
me. You're probably familiar with the three bows principle, and there's like some people talk about six bows and five bows and all
Mhm.
that sort of stuff. But I like three bows. It works for me and for the work
Which,
that I do, and so the three bows that I kind of talk about is, the bows of the hips and the legs. So that bow structure, the bows of
yes.
the spine, and then the bows of the arms and shoulders. And then
That's good.
linking them together with the breath
Yes.
in the stance. And yeah, so, I particularly
It's a
because
good.
I was just going to say, so I need to bring those principles too, because when I learned a lot of the Shaolin practices and all of that sort of stuff, it was really about the discipline and, that mental kind of finding the peace in the pain, so to
Mhm.
speak, and working through it. And maybe if I had have pursued it in that way, maybe eventually I might have got to a point where everything just relaxed off. But I explored different things and came around, brought other principles into it, and that bow concept really helped with my horse stance and all of my stances, just to understand the way weight was distributing, opening the structure, not just having like this downward strong force and trying to resist against gravity. And then I started to feel all these spiraling
Nice.
movements come through the body. And but what you were saying really about kind of pushing the edge way at the beginning of our conversation, um,
Yeah.
I think that's really what we're talking about, is just like noticing, like, where is your edge, exploring it, getting familiar with it, like flooding the consciousness to that area, getting to know it. And
Yeah.
there's many ways to skin that cat. And but not being afraid or too fixated and like dogmatized into a lineage, into it, like, it's just having the courage to just go there, but having a good basis of some principles, so you don't just, like, do your stance with your leg collapsing in and creating all these
Yeah.
shearing forces on your joints. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah. There's some rules could be bent and some rules can be broken, but
yes,
you have to learn the rules, and then you can know which. But,
yes,
yeah, like you said, it is scary and it's humbling, and sometimes even embarrassing to go into new territory, and
yes,
you worked hard, you've studied hard, you put all this time in, and suddenly you don't even know what's going on, But that's where the growth happens, you
yeah.
know. Um, there's a old saying, Chinese saying, humility gains and pride loses, and
Mm,
there's
humility
been
gains
many
pride.
ways of saying the same thing, but
Yes.
if you think that you can't learn something new, then you won't learn something new.
Yep. You'll always be right in your
That's right.
belief. Excellent. But so if we were to kind of take this whole conversation and just say someone who is very new to all this sort of stuff, maybe they've got some pain in their body, um, they're not quite sure, like they've tried lots of modalities and they're like, you know, they're maybe feeling a bit lost. What would you recommend? Yeah, like what would be just maybe a few recommendations that you would make for that person to help them get moving into a direction where, I suppose where we are today, that we've been there, you know,
Oh, gotcha.
yeah,
If they want to recover from
yeah,
an injury.
like I suppose not, and I love that you always talk about it's not just about getting pain free. There's a bigger picture, but I think for a lot of people it's hard to put the mind in that place if there's this pain going "Meh, meh, meh, meh," in the
It,
background. So it's
it speak loudly, that's for
yeah,
sure.
it can. So yeah, I'm just interested to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Gosh,
I'm putting you on the spot. I know. Yeah.
spot. Well, I mean, it probably depends on, I mean, do they just want to get out of pain, or do they want to be able to have a deeper practice and not be, limited by the pain and whatever injury or restrictions are most likely underneath that pain?
I think that's already probably the first good answer of, really for them
It,
deciding, what is it about? What's your intent? You know, yeah,
yeah, it is
yeah,
because they're different. I mean, if someone just wants to be able to put their shoes on and eat their cereal and go about their workday without pain, that can be done with if we get specific without a whole lot of time and effort, really,
yes,
uh, especially if they can find someone good to work with. Now,
yes,
if they to build their body to where that pain is no longer actually a restriction and the joints are all moving nice and fluidly and strong at end range and all these things, it does take more time and effort, but it's very doable. um,
yes,
but for me, part of it is finding the edge of that pain. You kind of almost give it a shape. If it's in a certain joint, what is the shape of the motion of that joint within pain-free range? Um, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's too abstract,
yeah.
but
It's a concept that maybe I'll give an example. I'm working with a gentleman, and he's a very high level wheelchair tennis player, one of the top players in the world, and so his shoulder goes through a lot, especially being in a wheelchair, and he through a series of tournaments was experiencing some pain in the shoulder, and which presented some challenges. And so the general approach initially, when he went to physios, and there's some wonderful ones out there as well. Of course, this is not bashing that trade, so to speak. However, his he was taught, to strengthen the structure, do a lot of external rotation, all that sort of stuff. But one thing that he wasn't taught in that instance was to get to know the pain, to get to know the nature of it. For him, it was just like, ouch, or oh, it's sort of like, I'm in my safe place, I'm in my painful place.
right,
So
right,
when we started to work together was to help him just slowly understand, like to really feel like the neurological pathways in a way of when the pain's coming on, and then just exploring the fringe of it. Maybe it's like just in this little area. So then we just got used to that, finding
right.
some relaxation, understanding in that, getting more blood to flow, stopping that neurological impulse to
Yeah,
go into shock, all of
yeah,
that sort of stuff. So I think maybe hopefully that helps to, to really get to know your pain, to not run away from it, to explore um, the nature of it, to explore
hmm
different, ways of moving with it, yeah.
yeah. That
does
was a
does
great
that kind
example.
of support what you were saying?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was a
Yeah,
great example.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing where, um, research, it's kind of depends on the question you ask. Sometimes you get great, or it's like Google, garbage in, garbage out. But
yeah,
there's been some very interesting research on a topic, and um, one of the things that we're realizing more is that pain and fear are very linked. And this is maybe intuitive. And to a certain extent in Chinese, they are linked. Um, but part of what that means is the more familiar you become, and experientially, with visualization, with learning the anatomy, what's going on, the more familiar it becomes. Sometimes what was pain is now just sensation. Whereas when it's this unfamiliar, oh my God, it feels like something's getting ripped apart. I don't know what that is. Pain.
yeah.
Um, just
Put it in
shit.
that
It's just
blanket.
not that. But as you get to know it, sometimes it's just maybe there's a little slice of pain and then just a whole lot of sensation around it. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, I like your example.
Yeah, it's kind of the saying that I use around that is it's sort of like in if you were in martial arts fighting an opponent that you couldn't see, you know, like
Yeah.
really get to know that opponent until you can perceive them. Maybe they're just always behind, and hitting you in the back of the head, so to speak. And it's
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah,
yeah,
that way.
so it's and not that it's sort of half your opponent, half your best friend at the same time, because that really encourages you to grow. And yeah, so I think, wow, there's some really good things. So if I were to sum up that, first, get clear on your intent. You know, like, know why. Like, is it about just getting out of pain? Is it about maybe something deeper for you? You know, because they will have a slightly different level of commitment and maybe a similar approach, but maybe a little less time. And then you said, what do we say after that? Was there anything before getting to know your pain?
I believe that was the first, and that was
Yeah.
kind of going on with, you know, exploring the shape of it,
Yes.
and the movement of the area, and then the movements, you know, above and below it, different parts of the body, and how that relates, you know,
Yes.
and you know, pulling on the whole chain a little bit, and see what else, you know, what other kinks might be out of place, you know, or what other
Yes.
roots might be out of place,
Yes.
because that's, you know, in the bigger picture, that's, you know, whatever's happening over here is affected by whatever's happening over here.
Yep.
You know, so it's one thing to just put some duct tape over here, and maybe that's all you need for what you're doing. But if you want to really, you know, if you want to get the whole thing, you gotta, you know, check the whole thing out.
Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
and that really links in with what you're saying before, like, you know, understand what's going on in your body, get to know your anatomy, you know, like, get to understand that it's not just muscles and bones and joints, and there's fascia, and, you know, the way your nerves work and the way blood flows through your body and all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, I think I think that's really helpful for someone. If someone could follow those principles of really getting clear on their intent, like what do they really are looking to do? You know, starting to understand the nature of the way that they move in little intricacies, what causes pain, what doesn't cause pain, and then exploring, you know, what's going on in the anatomy, you know, what's going on as we do that. I think that's there's probably a million more things that we could say, but to keep things simple, to help someone just go from I'm lost to, oh, I can actually start to, you know, move towards and then expand maybe into a different intent when the pain's gone away. And yeah, well, is there anything else that you'd like to add? I've had such a good time chatting, man.
Oh, I'd keep going for hours.
Yeah, me too, me too. Well,
This has been fantastic. This has been a lot
yeah.
of fun.
Well, let's tee up another call down the track, and maybe we'll dive into some deeper concepts, and I'll get some more questions from people. So if you've got a question, if you're watching, then send it to me. You can post it in the comments below this video, anything like that. But most importantly now, I'm sure some people who have come this far into the chat have probably enjoyed the things that we've been saying, and probably may want to look into your work a bit further. So how do people get in touch with you?
Well, I've got a website, which is StephenOpper.com, StephenOpper.com.
Awesome. And I'll post a
and-
link below around this somewhere so people can find it too. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there should be links to, I mean, I have a YouTube channel that's linked from there, Natural Movement System. My phone and email are on there, and yeah, I'd welcome questions, correspondences, anything like that.
Awesome.
Inquiries. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. And yeah,
Okay.
it's awesome to speak with a fellow explorer. And I look forward to us chatting more in the future and sharing our experiences and our path to help other people on theirs. And yeah, awesome, man. Well, until next time, I'm going to hit the stop button, and peace.